Good morning and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So today we'll be doing another sutta study focused on the seven bojjhanga, commonly translated the factors of awakening. And today we'll be looking at a short discourse from the Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 46, sutta number 3. Originally there was a different sutta reference in the link, so if you have the previous one, make sure to switch. So it's 46.3. This is from the Bojjhanga Samyutta, which is reasonable since it's all about the Bojjhangas. So sutta number 3 from the Bojjhanga Samyutta. And first off, just talking a bit about the word Bojjhanga. So Bojjhanga is a compound of bodhi, which quite literally means awakening. So it's from the root bud, which means to wake up, which is the same root from which we get the word Buddha. So Buddha is one who is awake, one who has woken up. And his attainment, which we call awakening, was in Pāli it's called bodhi or sambodhi. So the difference here is that sambodhi means complete awakening, or can also be translated self-awakening in some contexts. So bodhi then is what a Buddha attains. It's this waking up to the reality of things, waking up to the way things really are. And the second part of the word bojjhanga is anga. So anga has the meaning of limb, like your arms and legs, or the limb of a tree. So a branch is also called an anga. And it also has the meaning of the factors or attributes of something. So you can think of the bojjhangas as the seven branches of a tree, seven limbs of a person. But more importantly, you can think of it as the seven qualities of mind which lead to awakening. The seven qualities of mind which are necessary to attain awakening. And the Buddha lists seven bojjhanga. So the seven bojjhanga are, first off, sati. So sati is what we commonly translate as mindfulness. The second one is Dhamma vichaya. So vichaya means to investigate, to examine, to analyze. So Dhamma vichaya means to investigate or analyze Dhammas. And the word Dhamma has a range of meanings, but the two most common meanings are either the teachings of the Buddha, or it means phenomena in general. So Dhamma vichaya can be understood to either mean analysis of phenomena, or analysis of Dhamma, of the Buddha's instructions. In the context of the bojjhangas, it's usually taken in the more general meaning of analysis or investigation of one's experience of phenomena. The third of the bojjhanga is virya, which means energy. So this is from the word vira, which means hero. So virya is that heroic effort that we put into things, that heroic energy. So a hero is not someone who lazily slumps on their couch while things need to be done, but a hero is someone who resolutely puts forward effort to accomplish something. So virya is that heroic energy that we put into our practice. Then the fourth quality in Pāli is piti, which I like to translate as euphoria, though you'll sometimes see it translated as joy or bliss or rapture, but I usually translate piti as euphoria. So piti is this powerful ecstatic pleasure which arises particularly through the cultivation of meditation practice, but it can also arise under other circumstances. So there's a number of places in the suttas which talk about Dhamma piti. So this powerful euphoria arising when somebody hears the Dhamma, which usually indicates that that person has some deep affinity with the Dhamma, or some deep ability to understand the Dhamma. Then the next quality is passaddhi, which is tranquility or serenity. So another very important aspect of our practice is learning how to be tranquil and serene. So undisturbed, unbothered, calm and peaceful. And the sixth bojjhanga is samadhi. So samadhi literally means collecting together or holding together, or more generally, unification. So samadhi refers to unifying the mind, so collecting together our mind, bringing it together, holding it together, so that the mind is not scattered and distracted and dispersed. The mind's not wandering or jumping around, but the mind is completely collected and unified. And the seventh bojjhanga is upekkha. So upekkha we normally translate as equanimity. So upekkha or equanimity is the mind which clearly sees our experience but does not react to it. So yesterday evening we were talking about sense restraint, a discourse which is actually all about equanimity, about being able to pay attention to our sensations without reacting with either desire or aversion. So this is upekkha or equanimity. So that's a brief overview of the seven bojjhanga. So now coming to specifically what's in this suttas, in this sutta. So this particular sutta, this one, it's called the Sila Sutta. So the sutta on morality. And this one is interesting in that it starts off with the Buddha saying, so those monks who already have sila, they already have morality, they already have samadhi, they already have knowledge, they already have liberation, they already have knowledge and vision of liberation. So here he's talking about somebody who's quite advanced in the path. So he's not talking about someone who's just starting out, but he's talking for someone who's very advanced in the path. And he says, one moment here. So he says that for them, seeing monks is beneficial, listening to monks is beneficial, approaching monks is beneficial, attending to or supporting monks is beneficial, remembering monks is beneficial, becoming ordained after or following monks is beneficial. So he's talking here about a sequence of understanding that one develops. So beginning with seeing monastics, so bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, then from seeing them, you listen to them, you hear them. So you start to get interested. And once you get interested, then you approach them. You want to spend more time close to them so you can learn more of what they're saying. You support them, you attend to them. So as you approach them and listen to them, you also start to care. You start to care about your monastic teachers. You start to care about the monastic sangha. And you want to support it and help it along, keep it going. And that also means that you're constantly spending time around them and paying close attention to their needs and to their behaviors. So it's also starting to learn by example. Anusati means to remember them or recollect them. So if you spend time with bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, then they'll always be on your mind. You'll always be thinking about the monastic sangha. And when you're always thinking about the monastic sangha, then that means you're thinking about the Dhamma and how the Dhamma is lived and applied. So this means you're constantly recollecting the sangha, but also the Dhamma. And when you're recollecting the Dhamma and the Sangha, then you're recollecting the Buddha, because the Dhamma and the Sangha are the physical manifestations of awakening. And then naturally, if one is not yet ordained, and if one has this deep affinity with the Dhamma, then it's natural that one might be interested in joining the Sangha as well. One might also be interested in taking on the practices of renunciation, the practices of humility, of simplicity, of contentment. So committing oneself to the training. So of course, this is not going to be the path for everyone, but for many people who are deeply committed to the Buddhist path, it does eventually lead to them becoming monastics, becoming renunciates. So the sequence he's giving here, again, it's something which on the surface we would expect this to be coming from a description for somebody who's just getting started. So starting by seeing monastics and then going to listen to monastics and so on. But it's interesting here that the Buddha is, he's talking about somebody who already has morality, already has concentration, already has knowledge, already has some measure of liberation. So normally when we talk about liberation, we're talking about complete liberation of mind. But we can also talk about lesser degrees of liberation. So when the mind is partially liberated or partially developed. One moment, I just want to check something in the Pāli here. So, where was I? Yeah, so the Buddha is talking about how, again, approaching, so seeing, listening to, approaching, attending to, remembering, and practicing in accordance with advanced monastics. This is something that support to actually people who are in any stage of the path. So whether you're at the beginning of your practice or in the middle or towards the end, then this is something which constantly draws us closer to the Dhamma. And again, it's pointing out here that when, so next the Buddha mentions that when one listens to the Dhamma from advanced practitioners, so from bhikkhus and bhikkhunis who have made substantial progress along the path, then naturally one's mind inclines towards seclusion. Naturally, one's inclination is going to be to withdraw from the chaos and engagement of daily life, to withdraw from the unnecessary involvements that we usually get wrapped up in, and instead commit ourselves to the development of the mind. So this then is what the Buddha is using as his lead-in to talk about the seven factors of awakening. So once one has this experience of meeting inspiring monastics and wanting to learn from them and follow their example, then how does one go about following their example? What kind of mind states and qualities are we going to try to develop? So again, one practices seclusion or isolating oneself from the physical busyness of the world, but also isolating oneself from one's normal mental busyness. And once one is properly withdrawn from these the busyness and engagement and usual involvements of the world, then what are we doing? We're turning our attention towards the Dhamma. So constantly recollecting and thinking about the Dhamma. And so this is where the Buddha says, when one recollects and thinks about the Dhamma, then one on that occasion can produce mindfulness. One sati can arise. So here there's a bit of a play on words here, which is lost in translation. So the word that means to remember or recollect in Pali is anusati, the verb form being anusarati, which is related, etymologically, it's related to the word sati. So sati has both the meaning of mindfulness in the sense of a sharp, clear, present moment awareness of something, but it also has the meaning of memory or recollection. So remembering something means to be clearly aware of your memory, to be clearly aware of the memory that's present in the mind. And so when one recollects the Dhamma, when one thinks about the Dhamma, when one focuses on and considers the Dhamma, well, one of the critical elements of the Dhamma is to see it in our direct experience. So it's not enough just to read books about the Dhamma or think about the Dhamma, but it's something that we need to be able to see directly in each moment. So this is one of the reasons why we do put so much emphasis on mindfulness practice. Mindfulness is one of the important foundational aspects of mind training. And so it's learning how to bring our attention fully to the present moment so we can see things as they are. But it doesn't stop there. So a few years ago, I was invited to a mindfulness conference, which I found a bit amusing. And I went mainly because there were a lot of other bhikkhus and bhikkhunis going. And one of the presenters, he said, "So what's next after mindfulness?" Like cliffhanger moment, we're all waiting. What's he gonna say? And then he says, "More mindfulness." And I'm like, no. And I was sitting in an audience of hundreds of people, so I didn't actually say no, but I was thinking it. And I may possibly have said it to the person sitting next to me. Because that's not what the Buddha said. The Buddha did not say, first practice mindfulness, then practice more mindfulness. That's not what the Buddha said. So mindfulness is a beginning step, but it's not an end. It's not the goal. It's not the purpose. It's not why we're doing what we're doing. It's not an end in and of itself, but rather it's a step along the way that leads to awakening. So again, starting with mindfulness. So the Buddha says one cultivates and develops mindfulness, so bringing one's attention fully into the present moment and paying attention. And he says once one is dwelling with full attention in the present moment, then one can start to wisely investigate and consider one's experience. So this naturally then leads to the second bojjhanga, which is Dhamma Vicaya, this quality of investigating or analyzing phenomena, of investigating Dhamma. So when you're clearly seeing your present moment experience and reflecting on it with wisdom, then you're able to investigate it in terms of Dhamma. So, for example, the Four Noble Truths, applying the Four Noble Truths as a framework for investigating and analyzing one's experience. So, investigating, is there dukkha? So, practicing mindfulness of dukkha. Is there dukkha present in this moment? What does this dukkha feel like? What's the cause of this dukkha? What's it arising from? Again, investigate, look closely at your own mind. Paying attention, what happens when that cause of dukkha is diminished or reduced or altered? What happens to the corresponding dukkha? So in this way, you can start to analyze and investigate from a basis of mindfulness and see for yourself this direct experience of Dhamma. So this then is the second factor of awakening, which is Dhamma Vicaya. And so the Buddha then points out that when one is investigating and practicing the Dhamma, then naturally one's energy arises. It's a very interesting and engaging practice. So actually one of the common recommendations for someone who's having a lot of sleepiness during their meditation is to do some kind of investigation practice. Like if you're trying to do mindfulness of breathing and you just keep falling asleep, well, stop doing mindfulness of breathing. Do a more active, investigative style of meditation practice. And that tends to be engaging and interesting and therefore energizing. And as one energetically applies oneself to one's practice, then the Buddha says it's natural that one will start to experience euphoria. And this is especially true with the investigation of Dhamma. Because as we investigate our experience in terms of Dhamma, then we start to identify what we're doing that's preventing us from being happy. What we're doing with our mind that's causing us to experience dukkha. So as we identify what we're doing that's causing our dukkha, then we can start stripping that away. And in its place naturally arises happiness. And there can also develop this incredible euphoric excitement through directly knowing the truth of the Dhamma. So again, this is what's called Dhamma piti in many suttas. This euphoria connected through a direct knowledge or direct experience of the Dhamma. And this is more commonly when people think about the word piti. Well, there's two common places that people encounter the word piti. One is as part of the Bojjhanga, but the other place that it's commonly talked about is in the jhanas. So first and second jhana have this quality of piti, this quality of euphoria. So then this also is correlated. So as one practices mindfulness and investigating the Dhamma with this sharp precision of mindfulness, and doing so with energy and effort, and this euphoria starts to arise. This ecstatic joy connected with directly seeing the Dhamma and applying it to our experience, then that can become a basis for Samadhi. But it's interesting here that instead of going into the next step of being Samadhi, instead the Buddha here, he's talking about euphoria as a basis for tranquility or serenity. So why is this? Why does euphoria lead first to serenity instead of directly into Samadhi? Because when one starts to experience euphoria, just by sitting down and focusing one's mind on the Dhamma, then one no longer has the urge to seek it anywhere else. So the impulse to pursue any kind of external stimulus or external pleasure starts to fade away. So one cultivates a deep contentment with just being right here in this body, mind, in this present moment. So one's urge to pursue something engaging, something exciting, something pleasurable, that urge starts to fade away. And as that urge fades away, one's body mind starts to settle into tranquility, into a sense of calm and peacefulness. But that peaceful calm is saturated with euphoria. So usually when we think of words like euphoria or ecstasy, there's a quality of agitation. Like if you're at a concert and you're just like totally loving the music, you might have some euphoria, but that euphoria is combined with this agitation of body and mind. This stirred up, chaotic, unsettled feeling of body mind. Whereas the euphoria that arises through Dhamma practice has a quality of serenity and tranquility and stillness to it. So one of the images that the Buddha uses is like a still mountain lake, which is calm and clear. So it's soothing, it's refreshing, but it's also still and clear. So the sense of calmness and serenity saturated with euphoria. And this then naturally is the basis for the arising of Samadhi. So at this point, one has the three critical characteristics of Samadhi. So mindfulness, which we started with. So Samma Samadhi must have incredibly sharp mindfulness in order to be correct Samadhi. We have the quality of euphoria, so piti, and the quality of serenity, so stillness of body and mind. So when these three qualities come together, then the mind is extremely close to jhana, or entering into jhana at that point. So depending on how fully these three qualities are developed, one is either close to jhana or entering into jhana. So this is the samadhi awakening factor. And again, here the Buddha says one closely looks at that concentrated mind with equanimity. So closely, carefully, one examines that concentrated mind with equanimity. So the Pāli word here, ajupekita, let me see how Bhikkhu Bodhi translated this word. Yeah, he says, one closely looks on with equanimity at the mind that's concentrated. Yeah, so the word ajupekati, it's actually related to the word upeka. So the word upeka, it's from the prefix upa, which means close or near, and ikka, which means to look at something. So upeka means to look closely, to see something closely. So ajupekata means to closely look at something, but again, it's cognate with the word for equanimity. So it means closely looking at something, but without either pulling away or grasping on. So it's looking closely with a complete serenity of mind, a non-grasping, a non-rejecting mind, a non-reactive mind. So this is a natural consequence of developing samadhi. So through samadhi, we're learning how to keep the mind sharp and still, which are two necessary qualities for upekkha. So for upekkha, one needs to have strong mindfulness, so to be clearly aware of whatever is occurring. But one also needs to know how to hold one's mind steady. Because usually what happens whenever we have any pleasant sensation, we naturally jump towards it. And whenever we have an unpleasant sensation, we naturally recoil from it. So we need to learn how to keep the mind still while maintaining sharp, clear awareness of the experience. So samadhi is extraordinarily helpful quality for the cultivation of equanimity. So here the Buddha is talking about how, again, each of the 7 awakening factors supports the next one. So this is giving them as a sequence, as a causal sequence. However, it's important to keep in mind that the development of the 7 bojjhangas is not necessarily strictly linear. So later items in the list will also help previous items. So for example, if you're developing equanimity, then that will help you with cultivating samadhi. It would help you with cultivating tranquility. It can help you with cultivating mindfulness. If you're developing the investigation of Dhamma, well, as you try to investigate Dhamma, then that will require you to sharpen and clarify your mindfulness. And as you investigate Dhamma, then you need to learn how to pay attention to whatever is arising, whether you like it or not. So that will support the development of equanimity and so on. So again, although the Buddha gives this in a strict linear sequence, it can also be seen how each of the factors supports the other 6. So all 7 factors of awakening are mutually supportive. They all work together to create a mind which is bent towards awakening. And so the Buddha ends with saying, if one really deeply practices to, really deeply commits to practicing the 7 bojjhangas, then you'll get one of 7 results. So in the best case scenario, you'll attain full awakening in this life. And if you don't attain awakening in this life, then you'll attain awakening at the moment of death. And if not at the moment of death, then the Buddha then goes on to describe 5 kinds of non-returners. So just to briefly summarize that, he's basically saying, if you really deeply commit to practicing the 7 factors of awakening, then you'll either attain full awakening in this life or become a non-returner. So this is quite a strong statement. So it's indicating that the 7 bojjhangas are themselves a complete path to awakening, if one really commits to it. But one thing I do want to emphasize is, again, with this sutta, the Buddha actually starts right at the beginning with seeing bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, seeing them, listening to them, learning from them, supporting them, drawing close to them, and then using that as a basis for cultivating the 7 bojjhangas. So this also is a theme, and also like not just any random bhikkhu. Like you don't just go on the streets of Bangkok and just pick some random guy in robes and be like, you will teach me the path of awakening. You can try that if you want, but results are not guaranteed. But rather here, the Buddha is talking about seeking out monastics who have strong morality, who have strong concentration, who have a lot of knowledge, whose minds seem to have some degree of liberation. Like they're not under the control of their defilements all the time. So it's hard to find people who are 100% liberated. They're quite rare. But try to find someone who's at least partially liberated, and that they're not operating under the dominance of their defilements most of the time. So most of the time they're operating under Dhamma rather than defilement. So again, the Buddha here is emphasizing the importance of having well-practiced monastic teachers. So not making up the path on your own, not following your own opinions and ideas and preferences, not trying to invent your own self-training. I've never met a single self-trained practitioner who is remotely impressive. So that doesn't work. But rather to actively seek out, again, advanced monastic teachers who can help support us in the development of these 7 factors of awakening. And if we do so with sincerity and diligence, then awakening is possible in this lifetime. So I think that's all I have to say on this discourse. So maybe we can end the sutta with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And at this time, I'll take any questions that you might have. So I see a few people joining in. So hello to Gita, Michael, Kumu, Melissa, John, Alex, Amaranta, Jayanta, Charles Lee, Yankee, Si Yong, Aurora, Sud, Anne, Manish, Suba, Jenny, Grakyana, and Prashant. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So
I have a question about that.
Go ahead.
I was reading Ajahn Brahm's book, Mindfulness, Bliss and Beyond, a couple of years ago. And one of the things he pointed out, which I'd like to know if you want to comment on, is that that's a bold claim that the Buddha had made about practicing these even in 7 days, but 1 or 2 fruits. As you pointed out, he said the missing ingredient is jhana. He says that that's why for most practitioners it doesn't work. You're practicing mindfulness your whole life, even as a monk, but it doesn't work because you have to have jhana first. So I want to know if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's not directly related to this discourse. But yeah, definitely. Samma Samadhi as part of the Noble Eightfold Path. So, and Samadhi, of course, is also here in the 7 bojjhangas. So if your Samadhi is not strong enough, then of course you're not going to attain awakening. Now, this is quite clear throughout the suttas. Samadhi is a critical component in the path of awakening. And the Buddha defines Samma Samadhi as being practicing the 4 jhanas. Yeah. And also, again, just pointing out, mindfulness is only one of the 7 factors of awakening. It's not the whole path. It's just one piece of the path. It's only one of the 8 parts of the Eightfold Path. Yeah, you can practice mindfulness your entire life and not be 1 step closer to enlightenment.
So, when it comes to jhana, like my understanding is that these factors arise around the mind being focused on one object. But when it comes to the 7 factors of enlightenment, what would that object be then that jhana arises around? Would it be focusing on the investigation of dhammas?
So investigation of Dhamma is a Vipassana practice. It's not really a Samadhi practice.
Yeah.
And so with Samadhi practice, again, you're cultivating stillness of mind, accompanied with strong awareness. So usually that means focusing on one object. It doesn't really matter what the object is. You just pick something and focus on it.
That's what my question is, though. So it seems like with the 7 factors of enlightenment, this just like naturally progresses from one to another into jhana. But like, are you, when you're dropping investigation of factors at like, enlightenment step 2, so to speak, and you have samadhi and enlightenment step 7, are you picking up a different factor somewhere along the way?
So samadhi is actually the sixth one. The 7th one is equanimity,
Right.
upekkha. So I don't read the 7 bojjhangas as being like a meditation instruction. So I don't see it as like a 7-step meditation instruction, but rather it's talking about 7 qualities of mind which we want to develop. And you're not necessarily going to be developing all of them during one 30-minute period of sitting meditation. And you might. But there's actually other suttas where the Buddha says there are some occasions where you should focus on this bojjhanga and occasions where you should focus on a different bojjhanga. He actually divides them into 3 distinct groups. So the energizing factors, the soothing factors, and the universal factor, which is mindfulness. So he's actually quite clear. There are times when you should focus more on developing the energizing factors, and times you should focus on developing the soothing factors, but you should always practice mindfulness. That's always helpful. So that's the universal trait.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see, the energizing factors then would be the first 3.
Let me check. That's another sutta which I have to find the reference. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
And it's a relatively well-known sutta. Read the Bojjhanga Samyutta. I'm sure it's in there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And there's some questions online. Any other questions from here? Go ahead.
I had a question just regarding investigation of Dhamma. Lately in meditation, instead of investigation of dukkha, I've started an investigation of sukha, what leads to sukha, such as renunciation, the joys of that, instead of looking at the dukkha associated with these things. It's more looking at the joys that arise with that. And I was just wondering your thoughts on that. If you feel like that's part of that is that investigation of Dhamma. It's not just looking at the dukkha, it's looking at the sukha that's in.
Yeah, absolutely. Investigation of Dhamma can be any element of the Dhamma. So actually, nekkhamma sukha, the pleasure of renunciation, that's one element of the Dhamma. And that can be incredibly nourishing, especially as a monastic. It's really helpful to reflect on the happiness of renunciation. It's actually really delightful. So it can bring a lot of joy to the mind.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there's a question here from Sud. Sud says, without much mindfulness, also one can see Dhamma. For example, if you work with sick or old people or see someone at the end of their life, would this be an example of investigation, or is there something more you are referring to? That is an example. So Dhammavicaya is also seeing the Dhamma in everyday life. So it's not just something you do during meditation. This actually is a general principle of Buddhist practice in general, is that it's something that we're trying to do all the time. If Buddhism was something that you only did in meditation, then it actually wouldn't be very useful. Yeah, absolutely. We should be practicing Dhammavicaya all the time. So when you see sick or old people or dying people, then you can reflect. This body is also of the same nature. This is what the Buddha recommended. When you see sick, old, or dying people, you reflect, this body is the same as that body. What's happening to that body is also happening to this body. This body is not exempt from that fate. And you can reflect, all beings are subject to the same condition. This is a universal condition of samsara. So this would be an example of Dhammavicaya. And then looking at your own mind, like how does your own mind feel? when you reflect upon the inevitability of sickness, decrepitude, and death. And then you'll start to see in your own mind the attachment to health, attachment to youth, attachment to life, attachment to your body, attachment to self-identity. You'll start to see those traits in your own mind, and you'll see how those cause you dukkha. And so this is an example of Dhammavicaya, which, yeah, it's not necessarily something that you're doing during meditation practice. And it doesn't even necessarily need particularly strong mindfulness. This can be done within the realm of thinking. So thinking about Dhamma is also a part of Buddhist practice. Buddhist practice doesn't always mean having a silent mind. It can also mean thinking about and considering and mentally reflecting upon the Buddha's teachings. That said, Dhammavicaya can also mean in meditation, as you're asking. So, for example, anicca sanya, the recognition of impermanence. You can do that anytime, but it's especially powerful when the mind is in meditation with very strong samadhi, very strong sati, very strong samadhi. Then you bring in the perception of impermanence, and it's just mind-blowing. As you start to recognize even the most subtle, refined parts of your experience are insubstantial. They're not solid. They're not quite real. And that kind of profound experience can only happen during meditation practice. It's very difficult to get that kind of depth without the stillness and sharpness that comes through samadhi. And Prashant asks, what is helpful to enter jhana, samatha meditation or vipassana? Well, actually both are helpful, but samatha in particular tends to be the main support for entering jhana. But a certain amount of vipassana practice can also be very helpful, as the primary obstacle to jhana is the 5 hindrances. And the 5 hindrances are all based upon defilement and delusion. So practicing vipassana can help you to clear away the coarser influences so that the mind can settle into samadhi more easily. Yeah, there's a short verse from the Buddha, which Bhante likes to quote often. How does it go? Nati janang apanyasa Nati janang apanyasa nati panya ajayato, which means there is no jhana for one who lacks wisdom, and there is no wisdom for one who lacks jhana. Yeah, so these are mutually supportive practices. If you want jhana, well, then you need to have sufficient wisdom to be able to clear away the hindrances. And if you want wisdom, then you need to have sufficient samadhi to be able to see the defilements of mind. Then Pandit says, please comment on the term vosagga, which tends to appear as the goal, parenthesis, root of each of the 7 factors. So vosagga, does that appear in this sutta? I don't see it in this sutta. Vosagga parinaming, purification, as I recall. One moment, let me check. Relinquishment. So vosagga is relinquishment or releasing, letting go. So it's ultimately it's what all Buddhist practice is aimed at. It's aimed at relinquishment, renunciation, letting go. Yeah, so naturally the 7 factors of awakening lead towards relinquishment, because all Buddhist practice leads towards relinquishment. Buddhism it's all about relinquishing samsara. That's what it is. Good to see you, by the way, Venerable. And I don't see any other questions from online. So I see another monk, Ashin Visuddhananda. So hello, Venerable. Good to see you as well. It's always lovely to see other Sangha members joining online. And Sud has another question. How does one keep one's motivation to practice? It seems like overcoming defilement seems like an insurmountable task sometimes. Well, actually, I recommend, as Anagarka Jens was saying a few minutes ago, it's worth focusing on the pleasant aspects of Dhamma as well. If you're always just thinking dukkha, 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 well, of course, that's going to get a little bit dukkha-ful after a while. So also focus on the sukha of Dhamma practice. So reflect on the Buddha. Think about the Buddha. And just thinking about the Buddha, my mind just starts brightening up already. I'm just like, oh, buddy. Oh, love the Buddha. Start thinking about all the happiness that's come into your life through following the Dhamma. Start reflecting upon the benefits that have come through practicing Dhamma. And this can help give you a wholesome motivation, a happy motivation. So rather than just like, oh, this samsara is such a drudgery, I hate it. Instead, you can be like, oh, Buddhism's great. I love the Buddha. The Buddha's awesome. The Dhamma is great too. It teaches me so many great things. Like you can have a lighthearted, joyful, cheerful motivation to practice. So that's the last question online. Any other questions from the residents here? No? Okay, so we can go ahead and end the session with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu.